Edward Theodore Gein, born on August 27, 1906, in La Crosse, Wisconsin, and died on July 26, 1984, was an American murderer and body snatcher known as the Butcher of Plainfield, or the Plainfield Ghoul. His gruesome crimes in the 1950s shocked the nation and inspired iconic horror films and characters. Early life: Gein grew up on a remote farm in Plainfield, Wisconsin, with his domineering mother, Augusta, his alcoholic father, George, and older brother, Henry. Augusta was deeply religious and instilled in her sons a fear of women and sin, isolating them from the outside world. After his father's death in 1940 and his brother's suspicious death in 1944, possibly at Gein's hands, though never proven, Gein lived alone with his mother until her death in 1945. Her passing left him devastated, leading to his descent into obsession and necrophilia. Crimes and discoveries: Gein confessed to murdering 2 women, hardware store owner Bernice Warden in 1957, and tavern owner Mary Hogan in 1954. However, his horrors extended far beyond these killings. He admitted to exhuming bodies from local graveyards, particularly those of middle-aged women resembling his mother, to create macabre items from their remains. When police searched his farmhouse after Warden's disappearance, they uncovered a house of horrors, including human bones and skulls used as bedposts and bowls, furniture and clothing made from human skin, such as chairs upholstered in skin, and a corset fashioned from a female torso, masks and suits crafted from faces and body parts. Warden's decapitated body, dressed like a deer, hanging in a shed. Gein claimed he wanted to create a woman's suit to embody his mother, influenced by his fixation on her. While he was only convicted of 2 murders, authorities linked him to the desecration of at least 9 graves. Arrest, trial, and death: Gein was arrested on November 16, 1957, after Warden's son, a deputy sheriff, suspected him due to a receipt linking Gein to the store. He was found mentally unfit for trial initially and spent a decade in psychiatric hospitals. In 1968, he was tried for Warden's murder, found guilty but insane, and committed to the Central State Hospital for the criminally insane, later Mendota Mental Health Institute. Gein died of respiratory failure at age 77 in 1984. Cultural impact: Gein's crimes inspired numerous horror icons. Norman Bates in Psycho 1960, based on his mother obsession. Leatherface in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 1974, drawing from his skin masks. Buffalo Bill in The Silence of the Lambs 1991, echoing his woman suit concept. Recently, Netflix's Monster: The Ed Gein Story, released in 2025, explores his life and crimes, bringing renewed attention to his story. His farmhouse was burned down by locals in 1958, and his grave in Plainfield Cemetery was vandalized over the years, with his headstone eventually removed for preservation. Ed Gein's psychological profile: Edward Theodore Gein, known as the Butcher of Plainfield, exhibited a complex array of psychological traits shaped by severe isolation, familial trauma, and profound mental illness. His profile is characterized by deep-seated attachment issues, delusional thinking, and ritualistic behaviors stemming from his upbringing and losses. Experts have analyzed his case through forensic psychology, psychoanalysis, and psychiatric lenses, often highlighting a mix of developmental arrests, psychotic features, and paraphilic tendencies. Early influences and developmental factors. Gein's childhood was marked by significant adversity. Born in 1906, he grew up in a dysfunctional family with an alcoholic, abusive father and a domineering, religiously fervent mother, Augusta, who instilled in him a fear of women, sexuality, and sin, viewing the world as immoral. This authoritarian parenting led to social isolation. Gein was punished for making friends, resulting in shyness, strange mannerisms, like random laughter, and poor emotional development. He related better to children than adults, and experienced bullying, including due to a growth on his eye causing a lazy appearance. The deaths of his father, 1940, brother, 1944, suspiciously, and especially his mother, 1945, exacerbated his issues, leaving him absolutely alone, and triggering regression, magical thinking, and denial. Psychoanalytic perspectives suggest this fostered a punitive superego, pathological introjection of his mother's ideals, and attempts to undo separation through ritualistic acts like grave robbing. Influences from pulp magazines on cannibals and Nazi atrocities, e.g., Il Say Coke, further fueled his fantasies. Mental health diagnoses. Gein was formally diagnosed with schizophrenia, specifically schizophrenic reaction of the chronic undifferentiated type, an outdated term. Wasia, hearing his mother's voice post-death, seeing faces in leaves, smelling decaying flesh, and delusions of an uncontrollable outside force that was evil. Forensic analyses hypothesize additional elements like delusional disorder or schizophrenia spectrum disorders, potentially late onset and triggered by bereavement. Paraphilic traits, such as necrophilia, though he denied sexual intercourse with bodies, citing their smell, and obsessive-compulsive rituals in crafting items from remains were noted. Importantly, he was not considered psychopathic. He lacked charm, remorseless exploitation, or instrumental aggression, instead showing blunted affect, withdrawal, and limited violence targeted at mother-like figures. His IQ was assessed as average, full scale 99, verbal 106, performance 89, indicating intellectual adequacy, but inefficient functioning due to emotional disturbance. Psychiatric evaluation. 1957 evaluation. Following his arrest for Bernice Worden's murder, Gein was admitted to Central State Hospital for 30 days of observation. He was deemed mentally incompetent, with tangential and illogical thinking, especially under emotional stress. Impairments were psychotic in nature, rendering him unfit to stand trial, and unable to distinguish right from wrong due to a fantasy-dominated worldview. 1968 trial assessment. After a decade in institutions, psychiatrists found him competent to confer with counsel. However, testimony revealed claims of accidental killings, e.g., not aiming the gun at Worden, and memory lapses, suggesting dissociative states or amnesia. He was ruled not guilty by reason of insanity and remanded to psychiatric care for life. Ongoing institutionalization. Gein spent time at Central State Hospital until 1974 and Mendota Mental Health Institute from 1978 until his death in 1984 from respiratory failure. Lie detector tests cleared him of additional murders, and evaluations limited his aggression to specific triggers, behaviors, and expert analysis Gein's crimes: murdering 2 women, Mary Hogan in 1954, Bernice Worden in 1957, and exhuming at least 9 graves involved days-like states during grave robbing, where he targeted middle-aged women, resembling his mother, to create masks, suits, and furniture from their remains. This reflects an obsession with embodying or resurrecting her, analyzed as manic reparation for grief and identity repair. Forensic formulations emphasize a biopsychosocial model, predisposing factors, abuse, isolation, precipitating events, maternal death, and perpetuating rituals, avoidance, reinforcement. Psychoanalytic views highlight defenses like splitting, omnipotence, and denial, but stress limitations due to non-public psychiatric files. Much relies on secondary sources. Treatment in his era was custodial, with basic antipsychotics and psychotherapy. Modern approaches might include trauma-informed care. Gein's case remains a cornerstone for understanding the intersection of psychosis, trauma, and criminal behavior, influencing horror media and psychological studies. Gein's treatment evolution. Gein's psychiatric treatment evolved from initial emergency evaluations focused on legal competency in the late 1950s to long-term institutional management emphasizing containment and basic rehabilitation, until his death in 1984. Diagnosed primarily with schizophrenia, his care reflected mid-20th century psychiatric practices which prioritized custodial oversight over intensive therapy, with limited documentation of specific interventions like medications. While no sources detail individualized treatment plans, such as antipsychotics common in that era, chlorpromazine, his progression shifted from short-term observation to lifelong commitment in secure facilities, incorporating elements like occupational therapy in later years.
1957, arrest and initial psychiatric evaluation. Following his arrest on November 16, 1957, for the murder of Bernice Worden, Gein was arraigned and pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. He underwent a 30-day observation at Central State Hospital for the criminally insane in Waupun, Wisconsin, starting around November 20th. This initial phase focused on forensic assessment rather than treatment, with psychiatrists evaluating his mental competency for trial. Key findings included
diagnosis: schizophrenic, reaction of the chronic, undifferentiated type, an outdated term for non-subtyped schizophrenia, characterized by hallucinations, auditory, hearing his mother's voice, olfactory, smells of decaying flesh, visual, seeing faces and leaves, delusions, an outside evil force controlling him, and disorganized thinking. IQ assessment: average overall 99, full scale, with verbal strengths 106, but performance weaknesses 89, indicating emotional disturbances impaired his functioning. Outcome: deemed mentally incompetent, unfit for trial, and unable to distinguish right from wrong due to a fantasy-dominated worldview. No active treatments were documented during this period. Care was evaluative and custodial.
1958 to 1968, commitment and competency restoration. In March 1958, Gein was formally committed to Central State Hospital after being ruled unfit for trial This decade represented a shift toward longer-term institutionalization with the goal of restoring competency for legal proceedings. Psychiatric care emphasized monitoring and stabilization, though specifics remain sparse, likely involving standard 1950s, 1960s practices like group activities or basic psychotherapy, but without confirmed medications or therapies. Evaluators noted the onset of his complete emotional collapse, traced back to family deaths, father in 1940, brother in 1944, mother in 1945, reinforcing his schizophrenia diagnosis. By 1968, after repeated assessments, doctors declared him competent to stand trial, indicating some improvement or stabilization through institutional care. His trial, November 7 to 14th, 1968, resulted in a guilty verdict for Warden's murder, followed by a sanity hearing where he was found not guilty by reason of insanity, leading to indefinite commitment. 1968 to 1978, post-trial institutional management at Central State. Gein returned to Central State Hospital after his 1968 rulings, marking a phase of ongoing psychiatric oversight in a maximum security setting. Care evolved from competency-focused to maintenance-oriented, with psychiatrists noting his violence was limited to mother-like figures and affirming his schizophrenia. In 1974, Gein requested a sanity hearing for potential release, but was denied and remained institutionalized. No detailed treatments are recorded, but this period likely involved routine psychiatric monitoring amid broader shifts in mental health care, deinstitutionalization movements, though Gein's high-profile case kept him confined. 1974 to 1984, transfer to Mendota, and final years. In 1978, or possibly as early as 1974 per some accounts, Gein was transferred to Mendota Mental Health Institute in Madison, Wisconsin, a less restrictive facility compared to Central State. This move signified an evolution toward rehabilitative care, where he participated in occupational therapy and recreational activities like reading magazines. Staff described him as quiet, courteous, almost childlike, suggesting adaptation to institutional life without major incidents. No specific medications or advanced therapies, cognitive behavioral, or modern antipsychotics are mentioned, reflecting the era's limitations. Gein died at Mendota on July 26, 1984, from respiratory failure due to lung cancer at age 77. Gein's case highlights the transition in psychiatric care from punitive isolation to more humane, though still custodial, approaches in the U.S. during the 20th century. Limited public records mean details on therapies remain scarce, but his evolution underscores how mental illness influenced legal outcomes over decades. Ed Gein's effect on Plainfield, Wisconsin. Ed Gein, known as the Butcher of Plainfield, committed his infamous crimes in the small rural town of Plainfield, Wisconsin, population around 900 in the 1950s, now just under 1,000. His 1957 arrest for murdering 2 women and exhuming graves to craft items from human remains brought global notoriety to this otherwise quiet farming community. The effects were profound, spanning immediate shock, long-term stigma, economic and social disruptions, and a resurgence of dark tourism in 2025 due to Netflix's Monster, The Ed Gein Story. Immediate aftermath, 1957 to 1958. Gein's crimes triggered a media frenzy, with reporters from around the world descending on Plainfield, transforming the isolated town into a spectacle. Locals were horrified not just by the discoveries such as human skin furniture and masks in his farmhouse, but by the invasion of privacy and the sudden association with evil. The farmhouse became an unintended tourist attraction, drawing morbidly curious visitors who gawked at the sight, causing distress among residents who feared their community would be forever tainted. Plans emerged to auction off Gein's property, including turning it into a macabre museum, but the house mysteriously burned down in March 1958, suspected arson by locals to deter tourism. This event symbolized the town's desire to erase the physical remnants of the horror. In closing, the Netflix Ed Gein series portrays many false facts about his crimes and his life. Gein murdered 2 women as stated in this video, but this series has him murdering more than that. They also have him getting engaged. Ed proposed to Adeline Watkins, but she turned him down. Ed was a virgin his entire life, living his life in his mother's relentlessly controlling ways and how she felt about sex and women.
I hope you enjoyed this weird and wicked production. Please like, subscribe, and feel free to comment. Check out my other videos, from the history of Halloween and Samhain, to Michael Myers and the history of the Halloween franchise, and from Dracula and the history of Vlad the Impaler to many other videos, and plenty more on the horizon. Thank you, and have a wicked day.